You ready? The year is 1859. A guy named Buchanan is president of the United States. Oregon becomes the 33rd state in the Union. A guy named Charles Dickens writes A Tale of Two Cities. A guy named Charles Darwin writes Origin of Species. I commend both of those as incredible works of fiction. And then Billy the Kid is born of Western fame. And this guy does something amazing. His name is Charles Blondin. Charles Blondin is the first guy to ever walk across Niagara Falls on a tightrope, which might make him the first guy to ever walk across. I don't know if there's another way across. Charles Blondin, just simply walking across it wasn't enough. He becomes internationally famous, and once you become internationally famous for something, the next thing has to be bigger. And so he begins to do things like, at one point he's got a wheelbarrow filled with bricks that he's going across the tightrope. At one point he's got a chair that he takes out, he sets down one leg on the tightrope, and the other hand is a stove. He cooks himself an omelet, eats it, wraps it up, walks back across. At one point, and I'll bring you to the picture we have up here. At one point, he's got the crowd, and then, of course, as you can imagine, huge crowds, because tightrope wasn't a thing like it is now. This is the guy that made it famous. And so, huge crowds, and he says, "Do you guys think I can do it with all these bricks in the wheelbarrow?" And they're like, "Yeah, you can do it." Great. "You guys think I can do it with a man in the wheelbarrow?" "Yeah, you can do it." And he looks at a guy cheering really loudly, and he goes, "Hey, you, get in." See, it's one thing to believe you can do it. It's another thing to believe that he can do it. We're going to be talking about trust today. On his back, for those of you who can't see on the camera, this is his manager. His manager's name is Harry Colcord. He couldn't get anyone else to get in the wheelbarrow. And so eventually his manager says, "Okay, I'll get on your back." And his instructions to his manager were very clear. He said, "Don't try to help me. Don't try to balance me out. Don't try." He said, "Close your eyes, hang on, and don't do anything." Charles Blondin carrying Harry Colcord, Niagara Falls. We're turning back in our Bible in Mark. We're going to be in chapter 9 as we talk about trust and what it is to believe. As you guys know, we went through the first half of the book of Mark. Jesus is explaining who he is. Took a couple weeks out. We did Haggai, we did Mother's Day, and now this week we're going to be jumping back into a second series through the rest of Mark. Now that they've established that Jesus is the Messiah, you remember this. He says, "Peter, who do you say I am?" And he finally gets it. He says, "You're the Messiah." And so the rest of this book is him explaining exactly how that's going to play out. It's a series I've called The Suffering Servant. And I trust by now you guys have found your way to Mark chapter 9. I'll read it for us this morning, beginning in verse 1. "And he said to them," now these are the apostles that he just explained that the Son of Man is going to go die. So he says to them, "Assuredly I say to you that there are some standing here who will not taste death till they see the kingdom of God present with power." Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. His clothes became shining, exceedingly white, like snow, such as no launder on earth can whiten them. And Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," because he really didn't know what else to say, for they were greatly afraid. And a cloud came and overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, hear him." Suddenly when they looked around, they saw no one anymore, but only Jesus with themselves. All right. The question I often get asked about this passage is why Peter, James, and John? Why these three? And we see this, remember when he's going to Jairus' house to heal the little girl, the woman with the flow of blood stops him. He gets there, he kicks everyone else out, and Peter, James, and John go in with him. We see over and over and over again, there's this group of three that he takes in, and people want to know, why Peter, James, and John? This is kind of, as leaders, and all Christians really are leaders, there is this idea of influence that says, Jesus spent his time with the multitude. He really spent focused time with the 12, and then he really invested in three. And as we think about passing the baton, you guys have heard me talk about this. I tell Becca, never fold balloon animals alone when you can have other people, right? Never, whatever it is that you do, whether it's music, whether it's cleaning the grounds, all the things that we do, the idea is let's never do it alone. Let's always find someone to be passing the baton to. We're always investing in the next group. I think everyone picks them differently. Honestly, historically, for me, it's the prayer meeting. That's generally where my eyes are focused to see who I'm going to really invest leadership development in. But people have all kinds of different ways. Some people have suggested that for Jesus, it was, Peter, James, and John were faithful, available, teachable. They were the guys that were going to get it. Maybe. I can tell you this. I spent a lot of time as a kid as my teacher's helper. And I was embarrassingly old before I figured out why I was always my teacher's helper. It might have just been that Peter, James, and John were the three most likely to get in trouble if he left them down on the mountain. I don't know. I don't know why he picked these three, but I can tell you definitively why he did pick three. And this goes back to Deuteronomy. As they're laying out the code, God's given the law to Moses, and he says, look, a single witness shall not rise up against a man on account of any iniquity or any sin which he has committed. But on the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter shall be confirmed. The entire law code in the Old Testament was this way. We also see this Matthew 18:16. Jesus is saying, hey, if someone sins against you, go talk to them. And if they don't listen, hey, maybe you guys aren't seeing it the same way. Go get 2 or 3 other people, and then they can see what the real story is. Matthew 18:16. 1 Timothy 5:19, Paul tells Timothy, don't take a charge against an elder except if there are 2 or 3 witnesses. So this idea of 2 or 3 witnesses. We do this in our court of law. If someone robs a bank and I come up and I go, hey, I saw that guy rob a bank. And then Jurgen's like, hey, I saw him too. And then they call a 3rd witness over there on the stand, and 3 of us are like, we saw him do it. That guy, guilty. And in the court, they call this evidence, right? This is what's called evidence. And so I want to make this point this morning. Our belief is based on evidence. Proverbs says it this way. He says, when one guy tells his story, be careful because the next guy is going to come along and he's going to give his account of the events, right? But with 2 or 3 witnesses, we call that evidence. 2 Peter. Remember, Peter, James, and John are on the mountain. Later, Peter's going to write about this, and he says, we didn't follow cleverly devised fables when we made known to you the power and coming of our Lord Jesus Christ, but we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was borne to him by the majestic glory, this is my beloved Son, with whom I will well pleased. You guys remember that from his baptism. And then he says, we ourselves heard this very voice born from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. This is the moment Peter's later going to write about when he says, guys, the reason that we're willing to do all this and even die, and no one dies for a lie. No one dies for a lie if they know it's a lie. He says, we didn't follow fables. These aren't opinions. Guys, we saw this. John, Peter, James, and John are up there. John later writes, he says, guys, these are things we heard, we saw, our hands have handled concerning the word of life. Our belief is based on evidence. The thing about evidence is if I get put on a stand and I say, yeah, I saw him do it, then their lawyer's going to get up and they're going to do something called a cross-examination, right? And they're going to do their best to poke holes in the argument and somehow get this to unravel. Peter, James, and John were cross-examined for the rest of their life. In fact, at one point, Peter's given a chance to say that it was all a lie. He was given a chance to take it all back. History tells us this. They get his wife in front of him, they get his kids in front of him, and they said, take it back, or we're going to kill your family. And he looks at his wife and says, remember the Lord Jesus Christ. Guys, if there was ever a time to come clean, that would have been it. Our belief is based on evidence firmly established by 3 witnesses, firmly cross-examined. But I want to point out something else about these witnesses. So we have Peter, James, and John. 2 or 3 witnesses, right? On the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. But I want to point out something bigger that's going on here that we might miss. Jesus is also there with Elijah, Moses, and then we see a cloud. Those of us in the reading plan, we've been reading all about clouds if we've noticed it. Leviticus 16:2 says this. The Lord says to Moses, tell your brother Aaron that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, or he will die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. 1 Kings, which we just read, it happened that when the priests came from the holy place, the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priest could not stand and minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. Then Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in the thick cloud. And it's out of this cloud, the great I am of the Old Testament says, hey, this is my son, listen to him. And so we have the witnesses of Elijah, Moses, and the Father God himself, the law, the prophets, and the cloud. And so this passage, if it's anything, it's saying that Jesus just tells these guys, hey, I'm going to die. You're going to die. And so he's establishing some belief here. And this isn't blind trust. This belief is based on evidence. Now, the next question I get about this is, what's the story with Moses and Elijah? Where are they? When are they? Were they in heaven? They came down. Were they dead? And God just brought them up. And what's going on here? And if that's you, I want us to. We need to establish firmly in our mind about something about time. Okay? Because our question really isn't where are they. Our question is where are they now, or where were they then? And once we introduce time in this, we get kind of wonky. Remember, though, that God said, before Abraham was, Jesus says, before Abraham was, I am. Later, some Pharisees are trying to trip Jesus up, and he says, look, God's not the God of the dead, but of the living. So when we die, is he no longer... So there's some wonky moments here that kind of fall into place if we remember this. Time is a created thing. Time is a created thing. Let me ask you this. How long is an hour? This can be interactive. How long is an hour? 60 minutes, but only since about the 1400s. Before then, an hour was a 12th of the day and a 12th of the night. This is, remember that our watches are based on the shadow, help me out, sundial. The sundial. And so when the summers came, the hours got longer because they were longer, and a 12th of the day was an hour, which means the hours of the night got shorter. So when you read in the Bible about it was the 3rd hour or the 6th hour, the reason they don't say 9 o'clock is because that's not how time worked until the mechanical clocks of the 1400. All right. Quick lesson, if it comes up on Jeopardy, you're set. But here's why I say that. An hour isn't 60 minutes. An hour is a division of the earth turning on its axis with the sun. Who created the earth and the sun? God did. A moon, right? We all know, we remember this. We're going back to school. When a month is when the moon goes all the way around. That's a month. A year is when it makes it all the way around the sun. And in Genesis, we read about the one who created the earth, sun, stars. And if he created the earth, sun, and stars to give us time, he's outside of time that he created. Now, if there ever comes a moment, a few weeks ago, we talked about excuses or a lie we tell about God. Remember that? If there's ever a moment where you think, I wanted to do the thing God wanted me to do, but I ran out of time, here's the lie that we're telling about God. Either God didn't create enough time when he created this day or this month, or he gave me more on my schedule than would fit in the time he gave me. So if we ever use the excuse, oh, I didn't have enough time to get it done, what we're actually doing is we're accusing the God who created time. It's not the point of the sermon today, but it's something to think about. All right, I want to come at the time thing a second direction, and then we're going to jump back into the Moses-Elijah thing, okay? Not only is time created, but time is relative. Time is created, time is relative. This is going to get a little sciencey. I'm going to get in fast, I'm going to get out. If science isn't your thing, feel free to go to the bathroom or check YouTube. All right. This was Einstein's whole thing, energy, mass times speed of light squared. All right? And somewhere in that is the idea that the faster you go, the slower time gets. We've tested this. Modern day scientists have done this. We've put clocks in space shuttles, and they come down, and the time is different on both of them. If we put little Hunter if we could get him to go half the speed of light, and he would make a trip around for maybe an hour, come back down, an hour in his time would go by, and we would probably not even be alive anymore, because time slows down as you go faster. This is mathematical reality. We've tested this. It's weird, but it's true. Okay. Imagine if you could put here's what the math says. We haven't tested this because we can't go the speed of light. But here's what the math says. If we carry that out, if you could put yourself on a light particle, go the speed of light, time itself would stop. Eternity, friends, is not just a theological statement. It's a proven reality of physics. Okay? All right. Now, time is a created thing. Time is a relative thing. Everyone who tuned me out can come back in. We good? We ready to go? So here's the thing about Moses and Elijah. If I opened a book called Huckleberry Finn, and I read about Tom Sawyer and Huck going into a cave. Now, I put a bookmark there. I close the book. I go get lunch, and I forget about my book, and I come back 9 months later, and I open my book. Where is Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn? In the cave. Okay, every metaphor breaks down somewhere. Don't build too big a theology of this. God isn't just writing us in a book and forgetting about us. But my point is this. We are comparing a plane of the natural world and the supernatural world, and we have to get real humble when we start talking about converting those times between each other. Okay? The time that goes on in my life and in the book are not the same. And so anytime we talk about time in the supernatural world, we're going to get real humble about all the things we don't understand. Is that fair? Okay. Here's what we know. Paul says, for me to be absent with the body is present with the Lord. Here's what else we know. That we are all going to get resurrected. There's going to be a resurrection. Okay? I don't reconcile those two. That's God's job. I just believe him. Here's my very humble opinion. If this doesn't gel with your theology, throw it out. What we're going to do is we're going to believe the Bible says, and then when we make conjectures from there, we're going to get real humble. Here's kind of what I think happens. When Paul died, I believe that Paul's last breath here was his first breath in eternity. I believe that. I believe that the moment he was there. I believe when Billy Graham died, same thing. And I believe that Billy Graham and Paul got there at exactly the same time. Okay? Why? Because to be absent with the body is present with the Lord, and there is going to be someday a resurrection. And if the Lord tarries or the resurrection happens tomorrow, it's all going to happen at the same time. Okay? All right. Here's my point. When we talk about future things And when we talk about time between the supernatural world and the natural world, we're going to stay real humble and make a lot of room for each other. But what the Bible does say, we're going to stand on. Fair? All right. Here's the point I want to make about that. Here's why I spent so much time on time. One, I don't know that we can. I think if we try to get real candid or bold about what God did with Moses and Elijah there, by definition, we're going to be arguing out of opinion. Okay? And we can get real angry with each other if we argue out of opinion. But here's what I want to point out. If God created time, that means I can trust him with it. It's his. Which means the future, I can trust him with it because it's his. See, Peter, when he said, hey, let's make some tents for these guys, because Elijah's going to have to come first before the kingdom gets in. And what he was doing was he knew that Jesus had just told them they were going to have to suffer. And he was trying to bring the kingdom in his timing. And if God created time, we can trust his timing. And if God created time, then we can trust him with the future because he stands outside of it and he created it. Moving on in chapter 9, the cloud comes and overshadows them. Now, as they come down from the mountain in verse 9, he commands them that they should not tell anyone the things they have seen till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. We see this a lot, right? Don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone. And I think this has to do with time too. I think he's saying, look, there's going to be a moment when my kingdom's going to come. But I don't want these guys to try to make me king before it's time. So they kept this word to themselves, questioning what rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, saying, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Then he answered and told them, indeed, Elijah is coming first and restores all things. But how is it written concerning the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wished, as it is written of him. So they're asking about the Elijah coming and then him coming, what we refer to as the second coming of the kingdom. And he says, hey, you guys are really focused on that, but what about all the verses about me suffering when I get here? And so he's bringing them back the reality of, I'm coming now, and then I'm going to come and bring the whole thing with me later. Verse 14, and when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around them, and scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed. And running to him, greeted him, and he asked the scribes, what are you discussing with them? Then one of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. And whenever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not. He answered and said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him and fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked the father, how long has this been happening to him? He said, from childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? So he said to them, this kind comes out by nothing but prayer and fasting. The reason we believe is because our belief is based on evidence. These aren't fables. But belief belief is a choice, but it's also a gift, and I don't want us to miss this. Belief is a choice, but it's also a gift. See, Jesus didn't show up on the scene, and this is important. Jesus didn't show up on the scene and say, you guys are a bunch of strangers, come die for me, right? First, there was a crowd that watched him do what he did. Then after they saw the miracles, after he began to explain who he was, he picked 12 of them out and said, you come follow me. And they got to watch now not only what he did, but why he did it, who he was. And then only now in the halfway through his whole ministry, or through the book, he says, now that you know who I am, now that you can trust me, now that we firmly established who it is that I am, come pick up your cross and follow me. At Canyon Creek, I say this a lot. You guys have heard me say this. I really just want to help people take the next steps with Jesus. For some people, the next step is, you know what, just come and see. Come let your kids jump in a bouncy house and see what Jesus lovers look like. And for some, that might be, hey, come follow him with us. Investigate his claims. Read the Bible. See if living this way, see if following him this way makes sense. For some, we're already there, and then we get to a point that goes, you know what? Christ laid down his life for you. Part of following him is laying down your life for one another. There's a process there. And this guy, he was in the spot, he said, I believe, but help my unbelief. As parents, we get this. We've done foster, and quite honestly, I was up quite a bit last night praying for some guys that have come in and gone out of our home. And it's, Lord, I believe you're a father to the fatherless. I believe that your plans for them are good. Oh, Lord, help my unbelief. Different parents in different spots, but you guys get this. Oh, I believe that you're good. I believe you can rescue. Help my unbelief. Belief is a choice, but it's also a gift. There comes a time when we choose to believe, and that doesn't negate our prayers asking for, Lord, help our unbelief. That's where this man is. He wants to believe, but our big idea this morning, and this is what this is all leading up to, trust requires vulnerability. He's trusting this man with his very son. Yeah, I believe you can do it, but if you don't. The wheelbarrow thing, the same thing. Charles Blondin, we know two things about his manager and the guy that wouldn't get in the wheelbarrow. We may not know anything else about him, but we know this. The guy that wouldn't get in the wheelbarrow didn't believe that he could pull it off. Why? Because he wasn't willing to be vulnerable. The guy that got in the back, that guy was pretty sure he could do it. And this we do this in our relationships with each other. Part of developing trust is I'm going to be vulnerable a little bit, and then you come through, and then you keep that confidence, or you say you come through, you're where you said you'd be on time, or you do the thing I asked you to do, and then we're like, oh, a little trust is built, which because there's some trust built, you can have more vulnerability, right? We do this with each other. The tragedy of walking through life and never being vulnerable with the people around us and allowing them to hurt us means we're never in authentic friendships where we can trust each other. Trust requires vulnerability. They've been discussing among themselves on the mountain, what does it mean that he's going to die? And so they come down, they see the Father and the Son, they get healed, and then they go back to the same conversation. Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee. I'm in verse 30. And he did not want anyone to know it. For he taught his disciples and said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he's killed, he will rise the third day. But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask. They're trying to figure this out. They're trying to figure out, I thought the king was going to come and we were going to win. And I am willing to go even to death if it means we get to win. But this king is asking me to lose. See, God is asking for a vulnerability there that these guys weren't really prepared for. But that's how we know what trust is. Trust requires vulnerability. This is why this type of demon doesn't come out except for prayer and fasting. Because if you could pull it off yourself, if you could be the guy that comes through, that's one thing. But prayer is a dependence upon God. It's a getting low, and it's a getting vulnerable. And this thing that we do as Christians isn't a chance to go win the war and win the culture, and it's a chance to go low. Why? I think we see that in this man and his son. Let me give you an illustration. Let's say that Tracy and I are mortal enemies, locked in combat. We actually hate it. Don't take this metaphor too far. I love you, Tracy. This is just... But let's say we hate each other, and we've hated each other for 20 years, and we are intent on destroying each other. And we're out in the woods, and it's finally coming down to it, and I'm screaming at him, and I'm yelling, and he knows every one of my arguments he could just demolish. But what he also knows is there's a giant bear behind me. Okay? All right, now think about this. There's a giant bear behind me, and I'm screaming, and I'm yelling, and he has a choice to stand up and demolish all of my arguments, or to let the bear take care of the problem, right? Okay. I want to give you that illustration because now I want to say this. Guys, God is asking us to be vulnerable and dependent on Him because there is a truer, realer enemy to be defeated. And that's what we see. Jesus comes and He's letting the Romans do what they want. He could call down legions of angels, and He's letting these yakkadoodles nail Him to a cross. With a word, He could put people on their back, and He's staying there while they whip Him. Why? Because His enemy wasn't the Romans. He knew who His real enemy was. I don't think these are two unrelated stories. I don't think that He takes Peter, James, and John up there to get the witness, and this just happens while He's up there. Because while He's on the mountain, Peter, James, and John are understanding what it is for God to Himself, God the Son, to be glorified in His majesty and what it's going to look like someday. He's understanding why He has to die, because someday the kingdom's going to come and He's going to be glorified. And while He's doing that, there is a father whose son is being attacked by devils. And this son, without a word, is taking it. And then Jesus comes up, casts out the devils, and all of us, we read the next verse. Oh yeah, and then He gets up. But part of that, if you're living this out in real time, the boy falls down as dead. Without a word. And then Jesus tells him, get up. Guys, the thing about time is resurrections don't make sense without deaths. Like, we want the end of the movie where everything is great, but we don't want the suffering part that makes it so good. That's out of order. Think about this. We watch a movie about a kid that's getting bullied, and he starts working out. Probably wouldn't fly today. He starts working out, starts taking some martial arts, and he stands up to the bully, and we're like, yeah. Imagine, though, there was no opposition. Imagine it was just a movie about a strong kid that goes in there and beats someone else up. Well, that's not an underdog story. That guy's just a jerk. Right? God has laid it out that our dreams die before our dreams are resurrected. Sometimes our kids die before they're resurrected. Sometimes our parents die before they're resurrected. The thing about time is that death comes before the resurrections. Our big idea this morning is that trust requires vulnerability. Our belief is based upon reasonable evidence. Eyewitnesses cross-examined over years, all the way to their death. And those eyewitnesses ultimately said one thing, that Jesus died on a cross and he rose again, and everyone saw it. These are historical documents that we have more evidence that the cross happened than that Abraham Lincoln was president. And here's why that matters. Because if I hear about point number 2, if I can think about God's timing because he created it, and I'm trying to figure out if I can really trust God, I would submit to you that the cross says we can. Is God good to me? Yeah, he sent his son to die. Does God want a relationship with me? Yeah, he sent his son to die so that it could happen. Can I trust God going into this trial? Yeah, because the same Spirit that rose him from the dead afterward lives in you. Our belief is based upon reasonable evidence, and I would say that the cross of Christ and his resurrection says that we can trust God for what we're going through. I don't think that story was put here randomly. I think it was a picture that we can trust God with our suffering because he suffered. We can trust God the Father with our children because God the Father watched his child suffer. Belief is a choice, but it's also a gift. Belief is a choice, but it's also a gift. And I think for us, if we haven't made the choice, if we haven't said, okay, I believe I want to follow Jesus. The Bible says today's the day of salvation. Don't put off tomorrow what you should do today. But I think there's also something when we think about belief being a choice and also a gift for those of us who've been walking around for a while. I want everyone to close their eyes right now. Do this with me. It won't be long. Everyone close your eyes. I think there are areas in all of our lives where we say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. God, I believe you're going to help this family situation straighten out. Help my unbelief. God, I believe you're going to rescue my children. Help my unbelief. God, I believe that you love me. Help my unbelief. I don't know what that is for you. Maybe there was tragedy that happened to you or a kid, and you're thinking, okay, your word says that this happened because of wicked people and sin in the world, but I kind of wrestle with the idea that it happened because you're not good to me. Lord, I believe that you're good. Help my unbelief. Maybe it's the idea that, sometimes I think the world's a dangerous place, and your word says that you'll protect me, but I don't always believe that, and I think I have to do it myself. Lord, I believe your word is true. Help my unbelief. I don't know what that is for you today, but as I'm saying this, whatever that thing is in your heart, let's take a minute. Because belief is a choice, and that's noble, but it's also a gift. And God will meet you right where you're at. Father, for me, it's often the children in the foster care system that we've watched go back into situations we wouldn't wish for them. And we know you're a good Father, but Lord, help my unbelief. You guys can open your eyes now if you'd like. I want to talk to one last group of people. If this is you this morning or if it's you on the video, if you're at a spot where you think, okay, I don't know if I would die for him yet, but I've been hanging out, and God's good. And I want to believe, I want to follow, but I don't know if I'm quite there yet. Then this is for you. If you're watching online, God can see you. Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. We're going to be up here afterwards. If you're in either of those camps and you want to come up and you want to pray with me or Becca or someone, the elders will be around. We invite you to do that. We invite you to do that because belief is a choice, but it's also a gift. And if you'll say, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, he'll meet you. He always has, he always will. Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. And may the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.